Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We've got great friend of the show, Ryan Grim, on to talk about how Democrats should and are likely to approach the SCOTUS fight. We also have a pollster for Morning Consult on to break down their latest polling, both in terms of the presidential horse race and in terms of SCOTUS, so that will be great. But we wanted to start with a big ruling out of the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania that could have massive implications for 2020.
Yeah, this is one of the most undercovered aspects. We now know Pennsylvania, of course, was one of the tipping points in the 2016 presidential election. That's when the AP officially called it for Trump. And this time around, given concerns around mail-in balloting, we are seeing the likes of a possible Florida 2000 scenario. So let's throw this up there on the screen from the Philadelphia Inquirer. And they basically say how naked ballots in Pennsylvania could cost Joe Biden the election. Now, this is a little bit confusing. Now, essentially, if you reject a naked ballot, it's because a ballot was sent in the wrong envelope. This is as I understand it.
So
the arcane Pennsylvania election law.
The way that this is supposed to be is there's like an outer envelope, and then there's an unmarked inner envelope.
That's right.
And some percentage of voters always send the ballots back without the unmarked inside envelope. Now, in the past, those have always been counted. And by the way, in the past, the percentage of mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania has been very, very low. So it's been fairly irrelevant to start with. But even in the June primaries, those quote-unquote naked ballots without the inner envelope were counted. So what this decision says is those ballots will now be tossed. There is an opportunity theoretically for the legislature to come in and fix the law and say, no, actually those should be counted and can be counted. But it's a GOP legislature, Democratic governor, unlikely that it'll be resolved through the legislature. So this looks like what the protocol will be for election day.
That's right. And so just to explain to everybody, let's throw Dave Wasserman's tweet up there. He puts it quite clearly, which is that we are now in a scenario where over 100,000 ballots could actually be disenfranchised in the state of Pennsylvania because of that ruling about naked ballots. And so now it is actually on you can see there, he's talking about just in the city of Philadelphia, we're talking 40 to 50,000 people who sent it in the wrong way, I think in 2018, just based upon percentages, and extrapolate that to the entire state. It could be, of course, enough to swing the election. Pennsylvania was only put over the tipping point by approximately the same amount of votes. It was last time around.
44,000 votes was the margin of difference in 2016. So you're talking about just the naked ballots that get tossed alone in Philadelphia could be that difference. So this has absolutely massive implications. And we don't know a lot about the percentage of ballots that often get returned naked, as it were, because it's not something they've ever really tracked. But the numbers we have say it's somewhere between 5 and 6% of mail-in ballots. So yeah, you extrapolate that out, and that's a huge number and could potentially be the difference maker here.
Yeah, it's huge. And this is the other thing, which is now, how many days do we have to the election? Like 40-something days until the election. Now that means that it's on the Biden and the Trump campaign to actually have to go out and educate the vote and be like, please send in your ballot properly whenever you're doing that. So, of course, I think this just goes to show where the lawsuits that are coming on election day are just going to be crazy. And it's just like hanging chads in Florida. They're going to have to go envelope by envelope. Do they send it in naked? Did they mean to do it? Oh, maybe they enclosed wrong envelope inside this envelope.
Signed it in the wrong place or whatever.
Or did you not initial or they told you to initial? Or are they going to count it? The signatures is always a fun one. It's just an absolute disaster for how long it could take. And we're now learning more and more just how critical Pennsylvania is. Of course, it's always a swing state and all of that. But we are basically seeing that the whole ball game is Pennsylvania for the Trump campaign. So we have this report from Axios. Let's throw that up there on the screen from 2 days ago. The Trump campaign goes all in on Pennsylvania. Essentially the way they see it, and this actually makes electoral sense, which is if they're able to win Florida. Florida is like the true bellwether, but if they can win Florida and Pennsylvania, then they could win the Electoral College.
Yeah.
And that is what they essentially need to do. They could even lose many of the other blue wall states, but if they can hold on to Pennsylvania, then they win.
So there's some pretty interesting dynamics in Pennsylvania, and Nate Silver's 538 38, they did an analysis that was basically like Pennsylvania is maybe the most critical state. It's so critical that their model, their forecasting model, gives Trump an 84% chance of winning the presidency if he carries Pennsylvania,
right,
and Biden a 96% chance of winning if Pennsylvania ultimately goes blue. So that's how central this one state is. It is one of the central tipping point states. Probably Pennsylvania and Florida might be the two most key states to watch in terms of who is ultimately going to win this election. And it's also been a really fascinating dynamic in the state of Pennsylvania because, this is a state that prior to Trump had been routinely going blue. It was basically a blue state. It was just assumed that Democrats would win it more or less. And Ed Rendell very famously in 2016 predicted it would go blue again because for every person in the rural parts of the state the Democrats lost, they would pick up 2 in the suburbs. Well, that didn't work out, in part because of depressed turnout among black voters in Philadelphia. That difference between Barack Obama's turnout with black voters in Philadelphia and Hillary Clinton's, that alone essentially made up the margin that Trump ultimately ended up winning by. So one of the interesting dynamics here is while Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota seem to be moving pretty decently in Biden's direction, Pennsylvania has lagged a bit behind.
That's right.
Trump has done a bit better in polling in Pennsylvania than he has in those other swing states. Now, he still is behind in basically every poll that has come out of that state recently, was fairly narrow. So the most recent one had Biden up 3, Biden up 2, Biden up 3. There was one that was a little bit of an outlier, Biden up 9. The overall average has Biden up by something like 4 points, so fairly close within that margin of if things shift a little bit and the polling is off a little bit, Trump could ultimately pull it off. Or if you have some massive disenfranchisement of 100,000 voters due to this naked ballot situation, that could also be enough in a state like Pennsylvania that is expected to be so close to actually change who the ultimate winner is here. And of course, Democrats are much more likely at this point, at least what they're telling pollsters, is that they're much more likely to cast their ballots by mail than Republicans are because of the president's comments about mail-in balloting.
Well, and that's the thing, too. We just don't know how this is all going to play out. We've seen those open reports from Kevin McCarthy openly warning Trump, being like, listen, a lot of our voters are old. They're not going to come to the polls. So if you tell them not to vote by mail, they may just not vote. And that very much could be the case this time around. We don't know what the impact of the president's rhetoric is going to be. And I think this entire thing has been a dramatic mistake for him, going after the mail-in balloting, specifically for this reason, which is that now what the hell is going to happen? So let's say that some things do get disqualified, but let's say enough Republican votes get disqualified too. And you can see that easily happening. Then what are they going to do? They're going to challenge mail-in balloting and argue on the side of being able to count envelopes and, count naked envelopes. It's just a total disaster from an electoral integrity perspective. And if that were to put either Trump or Biden over the edge, both sides could, I think, legitimately claim this is kind of this is a mess.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple other things here. So Democratic Party did get some good news in their view out of the state Supreme Court. They were successful in kicking the Green Party off the ballot. You'll recall we reported here last week how the state of Pennsylvania had actually been held up in even being able to send out their mail-in ballots. They were supposed to be able to have done that like a week ago. They weren't able to do it because this question over the Green Party was caught up in court. Democrats aggressively trying to push them off the ballot. They were successful. Congratulations, guys. You should be really proud of yourselves on that front. But the other thing to keep in mind about Pennsylvania is this is one of the states where the law requires that they not count a single mail-in vote until Election Day.
Right. So
not only do you have potentially an incredibly chaotic situation with this naked ballot situation, but you also have, they can't even start thinking about these things and opening them and counting them and figuring out what qualifies and what doesn't until Election Day. So Pennsylvania, as you put it at the beginning, very much shaping up to possibly be this year's Florida and what will be an incredibly troubling situation, especially, country's on edge.
Yeah,
there's just tensions are so high. There's zero trust between, certainly political leadership, but there's zero trust between the populace. There's zero trust in institutions. There's zero trust in the courts. That's that's only going to become even more fraught and even more polarized. So these types of scenarios, that's why they become so significant and ultimately so troubling.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we're really sharing up to be, it could be a real disaster. Although all of this could be for nothing. I mean, it could be a blowout, right?
Yeah.
Like, it really could. And that's something that I think we're also undercounting that possibility. And what we're trying to present to everybody here is if things go awry, you need to be aware of how exactly that's going to be so you don't get surprised on election day.
Last thing here is, I don't know if you all saw this news item that Bloomberg has decided he's going to spend like $100 million in Florida. The reason for that is because Florida, surprisingly, they're one of the states that actually gets their ballots counted pretty quickly. And they don't have this rule that you can't count mail-in ballots till Election Day. So in theory, they'll have their mail-ins done. They'll be able to report that out in a timely fashion. If things go relatively smoothly on the ground on Election Day, which you should have actually fewer voters going to the poll on Election Day because of the massive mail-in ballot, he's hoping that if he can put Biden over the top in Florida, then we're not going to have the kind of nightmare situation that we are laying out here. Because as we've been talking about, if Florida goes Biden, it's pretty much over for Trump. Like it would be almost impossible for him to make up those electoral college votes elsewhere. So in that scenario, look, we could know on election night, and we could know clearly and relatively early and have it all be fairly clean and straightforward and easy. Or, if Trump ends up winning Florida and he's running up big margins in other places, we could have a pretty good sense that it's going his direction as well. When something like the naked ballot situation in Pennsylvania comes into play is when it is a lot less clear and when it is a lot closer and these things take on outside significance.
That's exactly right.
All right, we're going to tell you what's on our radars. That's next.